All right, today I'm sharing 10 things that I did to heal my marriage. And obviously, I'm going to preface this by saying this was a two-way thing. This was not just me doing all the work to heal our marriage. It obviously required him to put in some effort too. Some of the points that I'm sharing are both of us, things that both of us did, and some of them are just mine because I'm going to speak from my experience, my perspective. I'm not going to speak for Peter. Although if you want to hear him share, we actually share our entire story of going through infidelity, addiction on my podcast. It's episode number 1. I'll link it for you below if you want to check that out and reference it. We kind of have a 2-part marriage story that I've talked a lot about on other platforms, including the podcast, where we went through infidelity, we went through addiction 9 years ago in 2015. And we went through that and had to learn how to process all of that and survive all of that. And then we also went through another part in our marriage where we were learning how to thrive together. It's one thing to survive infidelity, it's another thing to get to a place of thriving. And I would say that even just learning how to thrive in marriage as a couple in general is something that a lot of people struggle with. It's easy to get married, you start having kids, you live life, you kind of get into a rut, get into a routine, and pretty soon you realize the spark is gone, you have resentment, you don't have libido, you're just missing that thing that you thought that you would have as part of your marriage. And so our second part story, which was learning how to thrive together, really didn't even have to do with our first one. So that's why I say we have a 2-part story. We've shared both of them on the podcast. You're welcome to check that out. But I'm going to give you tips that will pertain to either one. If you're going through infidelity, or if you're just like, hey, we're just at a point in our marriage that's like, blah, like I don't have the marriage of my dreams. We're not connecting. I'm not feeling this. I'm feeling resentful. Here's how you're going to turn the ship around. So point number 1 is get help. You're not going to be able to do this on your own. You're not going to be able to lead yourself out of your own mess. The saying is, you don't know what you don't know. That could not be more true. You got yourself into this mess based on what you know. And I say that meaning even if the other person is the one that committed the action, right? You are still both in this together. So you got yourself into this situation based on what you currently know. You probably don't know what you need in order to change it around. So it's going to require you to get some help, get some support. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is work on yourselves individually and together. So when we first went through our infidelity story 9 years ago, we really worked on ourselves individually. He had a counselor that specialized in the addiction that he had. I got a counselor for me to really work on my own stuff. And we really worked on ourselves individually for a while. Then when we went through our we want to start thriving together second story, that's when we hired a marriage coach who worked with us individually and did sessions with us together as a couple. And I really, really recommend that because it's going to take you looking at yourself, your own patterns, your own part in this, both of you doing that individually to really help make some momentum in the marriage together. Now, I help a lot of women and they always ask me, what if my husband doesn't want to work on things? And my response to them is always work on yourself anyways, because you can change a lot just by changing yourself. You'll be surprised. And I have more points coming that will prove this point, but you can change a lot just by working on yourself. So work on yourselves individually and together as a couple. Get some help in that aspect. Point number 3, I got really brutally honest with what I wanted and what was not working for me. I think this part can be the most difficult, most challenging for people, especially women in relationship, because we feel bad that we want more, or we tell ourselves that we shouldn't want more, or we should just be happy with what we have, or that things aren't actually that bad. It's almost like we're constantly diminishing what we want. And so I got to the point where I got really, really honest about it. And instead of diminishing what I felt or what I knew I wanted and needed, I just got really, really honest with myself. This does not mean I came to him with this laundry list, although there were definitely conversations with our coach about it. But I got really, really honest with myself and put it on paper. Hey, this is what's missing for me. I'm missing the spark. I'm missing you pursuing me as a woman, as your lover, as your wife. I'm really missing you not stepping up and leading or having direction outside of me and the kids, right? I got very, very honest and real about that. Point number 4, I got curious about all the different parts and sides of me, including desires that I had and maybe things about me that before I would have thought were shameful, or I would have shunned them, or I would have hidden them away forever, or I would have looked at other people and been judging them for it. So when I found someone doing something that I was like judging them for, I got curious about myself and was like, hey, what is this showing me about me? What am I maybe denying in myself? What am I maybe not realizing that I've thought about, or that maybe I want, or that maybe I would be curious about, things like that. And we talked about all of it. And I again think this can be the most awkward for couples, because you're having really awkward conversations when you're getting really real about like, actually, maybe I would want to explore that. It can be very, very awkward, but it's also what creates big depth in your relationship. And when you kind of bring that stuff into the light and you actually talk it through, it helps you to actually realize like you don't actually want it. It kind of loses its hold over you. And I really think that's healthy, because when we kind of shove things in the closet, we don't want to talk about it. We want to just like hide it away, pretend that it doesn't exist, pretend that that's not a part of us, or that maybe we would never be like that. That's when things kind of sneak up on you. It's almost like they fester in the dark, and then all of a sudden they sneak up on you, and then you find yourself acting out of it in an unhealthy way. And so for me, this was really about just like, how can we explore these things and talk about all of it? Because the more we can talk about everything together, no matter how awkward it is, the more we can like diffuse the situation from the get-go. Point number 5, I faced my biggest fear of being divorced and being on my own as a single mom of 2 kids. So with our second marriage story, we got to the point where I said, I just need this to end. And we did end it. We ended our marriage. We had a full-on like ceremony to end it, all of that. We've shared it on my podcast. Again, you can listen to that below. But my biggest fear was being a divorced single mom on my own, responsible for bills, when he had been the primary provider. And I knew that I really, really needed that space. I really, really needed us to end things, but I was very afraid of that. And so when I actually faced that fear and said, no, I know this is what I need, and I need to lean into this, I need to follow this, that kind of was like pulling the skeleton out of the closet. And when you pull the skeleton out of the closet, you realize it's not as scary as it was, right? But simultaneously, his biggest fear was losing me. His biggest fear was me leaving, me saying the marriage was done. And so when he faced that fear and had to grieve that, and we both literally let things go, we released each other, we grieved it, we let go. That's when we both had the space to really figure out, okay, now that I've faced this really scary thing, who am I? Who do I want to be? Where do I want to go from here? And that was huge for both of us, because fear always tends to control you. If you have things that you're really, really afraid of, it's going to control the decisions you're making, the direction that you're going, in an unconscious, unhealthy way. And so you want to face those fears, because that's when they lose their control over you. So that leads me into point number 6, which is we both grew during our time apart because we faced our fears and we really released each other. And during this time, that's when he really stepped into who he was outside of me and the kids, what his mission, what his vision was, the direction he was going with his life. And he really stepped into this attitude and energy of like, this is who I am, this is where I'm going, with or without you. And I was like, where has this been? This has been what I've been waiting for all my life, right? And I was able to really step back and see like my part in some of the patterns, because even when he was gone and we weren't together, I was still having some of these patterns come up. And I was like, oh, this wasn't all him. This was me. And I really got to start working on myself and changing those within myself while we were apart. Point number 7, I broke a huge pattern when we got together and started something new. So we ended things, we were separated, all of that. And then we grew, and then we decided to start something new together. We didn't call it coming back together because we really wanted something new. So we called it starting something new. And from that point forward, I really did want to change things in our relationship. And I understood it was really important to kind of reverse some of these patterns that had been set into place for years that I wasn't happy with. And a big one for me was stepping up and taking over, stepping up and taking control and being like, I'm the one with the answers and I'm going to figure this out. And this is where we're going. And this is what we're doing. He was the primary breadwinner, he still is, and he paid all the bills and all of that. But I can be very decisive, or I can be very quick to step up and make a decision. And when I would sense him being slower to step up and make a decision, I would be like, I'll just do it. And I would take over and make the decision while silently resenting the fact that he wasn't stepping up and making the decision. And so I stepped back. I had this huge pattern. I remember to this day what we had to go through in order to break this pattern. I was working with my coach and talking with him about it. And he was the one that was like, you just have to keep stepping back. Like, you cannot step up and make this decision. It was a decision we were making about a house and a living situation. And I wanted to like just make this happen. We had kids. I needed a plan. I needed to know what was going to happen. I couldn't just be waiting on this. And I did want him to make the decision. I did want him to lead. I did want him to be responsible, but I didn't want to wait for him to do it. And it was really hard. It was really challenging to step back and be like, no, I'm going to wait, because I'm not going to do what I always do, which is just step up when I sense that he's waiting. And because I stepped back and I really gave him that space, he was able to break one of his big patterns, which was waiting for me to step up because he knew I would if he didn't, right? And so I talk about this all the time, about letting the ball drop. And basically, as women, we just get into the habit of catching the ball before it drops. And if we truly want a man to step up and to be leading and to be taking that role in our relationship, somebody has to go first. And a lot of the times it's going to be us choosing to step back. Because when we're stepping up and we're constantly catching the ball, we're in our masculine, and he doesn't really know how to like take that masculine role back from us. And so when we soften and we step back and we don't take that masculine role, it gives him space to step forward into that healthy masculine. So that was a huge thing for us and really changed a big dynamic in our relationship. He did ultimately step up and step through. It was not in the timeline that I would have wanted or that I would have thought that he was actually stepping up. It would have been very easy for me to look at his waiting, which he did, and say, you're not actually doing this, so I'm just going to take back over. But he just needed space and he needed time, and it looked very different than how I would have done it. But that changed everything, and it was a huge shift in our relationship from that point forward. Step number 8, I released resentment physically from my body that I had. I had years of like unprocessed feelings stored in my body. That's what resentment is. It's just old, stale anger that's stored in your body. It can physically weigh you down because it's literally sitting in your body. It makes you feel heavy. It makes you feel not motivated. It steals your health. I had health issues. It can take your libido, and it causes you to keep seeing them through this lens of this old story, which is resentment, right? So I had this lens that was like putting on a pair of sunglasses. So every time I saw him or things that he was doing, all I would see was through this lens. So even if I had proof for anything else, I couldn't see it because I had these tainted stories taped over my eyes that were causing me to see him through old stories of like, see, I'm always alone. It's always up to me. I have to do everything. I can't actually trust you. I can't actually lean on you. You're gonna like fail me, whatever it is. And because of all those old stories, it also kept me from not seeing him for who he actually was. And so I was able to walk through a really big, specific forgiveness process and also some physical, somatic practices to release resentment from my body and to actually like see the stories that were going on. And that caused me to be able to drop those stories, drop those lenses, and see him for him. And that was huge. I will never forget the day where I was like, oh my gosh, I've had this amazing man who has been showing up and he has been loving me and he has been there time and time and time again. And I just haven't been able to see it because I've been so entrenched in this old projection and story of him not being there and him effing up and like, I'm going to have to handle it all by myself. And so I was able to see him completely differently, but also I was able to heal my body and release that resentment, which was keeping me very locked up and very resistant to him. Which leads me into point number 9. I changed my nervous system and I changed my body language. Wouldn't have been able to do this if I hadn't released resentment from my body physically. But I didn't realize that resentment was causing me to be so like physically standoffish. There were like actual walls in my body that I couldn't see, but I could feel them. And it was like so uncomfortable to just like hold his hands and look in his eyes and be like, oh, let's talk. And I'm just gonna look into your eyes. Or like hold eye contact during bedroom time. Like all of that was just so awkward. And it's because I had all this resentment literally stored in my body that was putting up these walls. And so when I was able to release that, I was able to change my body language, and I became very deliberate in how I approached him. And I would approach him and I would actually stand and face him, and I would take his hands and I would look in his eyes and I would smile and I would like just deliberately soften. Sometimes when we were sitting at the table, instead of like leaning forward and be like, hey, so we need to talk about this, I would like literally lean back and be like, okay, I would love to talk to you, and be like open and receiving and receptive and like change all of that, because I didn't even realize that it was so there and like making such a difference. Also, my nervous system. So you've probably heard people talking about your nervous system. Your nervous system is just like your energy and the place that you're living from. You'll hear a lot of people say they feel stressed or they feel anxious or they feel whatever it is. That's your nervous system. That's the place that you're living from. When I was able to release so much resentment and release so many stored emotions and experiences from my body physically, I was able to live from a new state of being, which was calm, peaceful, relaxed. I was able to actually like take a breath and like look around me and enjoy a moment, and not just be constantly thinking of the next thing that I needed to get to or the next thing that I have to do or what else is on my list. And because I was then relaxed and receptive, I was able to see him, I was able to experience him, I was able to be in the moment with him from a completely different place. And that was huge. Point number 10, I started seeing him with fresh eyes, which gave me a newfound appreciation for him. It also caused me to like relax, stop nitpicking at what he was doing wrong, or nitpicking at what I wanted him to do more of, or stop wanting to try to change him or make him into something else. And because I relaxed and I let that stuff go, it actually gave him space to blossom. Kind of funny how that works. But when you give them space, they actually want to step up. They want to rise up. And when you stop making things an issue, it actually gives them the space and the time to make that an issue for themselves. They don't want a mom that's like making this an issue for them. And so I had to take myself out of mom role by seeing him with new eyes, having this newfound appreciation, and then relaxing and like backing off, literally giving him space to decide what he wanted to do about things, what he wanted to do about life, about our marriage. And I guess it's like when you stop pressuring them to be different and you just appreciate them for who they are, that's when they actually want to rise up. That's when they want to actually change. And so that was really huge for us too. So there's my 10 points for how I healed my marriage in a nutshell. If you need more, you can check out my podcast, Level Up Babe. Also, you can check out my best-selling course, The Resentment Trap, if you want to learn how to release resentment from your body physically and heal your marriage and start setting new patterns into place. I will also link it for you below. I'll see you next time. And if you love this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I have a bunch of new content coming your way. I'm going to be talking all things marriage, feminine energy, routines, all of that to help you out too.